From the Church Pension Group, this is Choose Well.
Hi, my name is Krishna Dalakia, and this is Choose Well, the podcast that focuses on well-being, from maintaining physical and psychological health to being financially secure. Today, our subject matter expert is Jody Horstman.
Happy to be here.
Who is a licensed clinical psychologist and clinical addiction counselor. Jody is the Chief Clinical Officer of the health system Aspire, Indiana. She has had a lot of experience working on crisis and disaster relief, along with other areas of psychological wellness and well-being, and has led webinars for CPG in the past. Jody is a Credo Psych Health faculty and has contributed content for CPG's e-learning resilience course. And I'm so excited to have you with us today, Jody. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Getting used to working at home.
Yes, I'm getting used to working from home, and I'm currently recording this podcast from my closet.
That's very adaptive.
Yeah, all for you, Jody.
Thank you.
So today's podcast is going to focus on neuroplasticity and how we adapt to change and why making change is so hard. And, when we were coming up with the focus of this podcast, the first person I thought about was you, because you've had so much experience working in this area of neuroplasticity and change, and you work with people all the time. And I just wanted to ask, how did you get into this field?
Well, that's a great question, because I did not begin in this field. So as we talk about change, I actually began college in aerospace engineering. I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, and then after about a year, I decided that wasn't feeding any passion. And the course that I had that I really enjoyed at that point was in the behavioral sciences. And so I decided I was going to change my major, much to the dismay of my advisor and my parents, who thought I was going from this hard science to a soft science, and were concerned about my future.
Is there a relationship between aerospace engineering and behavioral health and psychology?
Yes, there is actually, because it's about systems. The systems of how do you keep a plane in the air? How do things work together? And the same can be applied to human behavior.
Well, I'm glad that you stuck to this path, because I know you've helped so many people. Going back to this topic of neuroplasticity and change, the one thing that I hear when I'm working with people or presenting at a conference is that change is so hard, right? Like, it sometimes takes many attempts to trying to adopt a change or change a behavior or a health habit. And it can be so discouraging. And I just, wanted to ask, why is it so hard?
You're right. That's a kind of a universal truth, right? That people come up with is think we want things to be different, but it seems so difficult. So I think one of the things that affects that is neuroplasticity. It's the way that our brains work. Because our brains are so very, very efficient at kind of learning something and forming a neural pathway, which is basically an autopilot. Think of it as an autopilot for your brain, right? So we may learn something, and it may take us some time to learn that, and it can be quite complex. So if you think about like learning to drive a car, and then once we learn that and repeat it so many times, our brain actually physically forms that neural pathway. So it becomes like a little superhighway. So we don't have to think about it anymore. That's our brain's way of allowing us to attend to other things. And so that becomes ingrained. And then when we go to do something different, you might notice, let's say you went to go and drive a friend's car that's a stick shift and you drive an automatic, and all of a sudden things just don't seem right. It's sometimes, where are the buttons? Where, even if I switch in my own car to my other car, like, where's the wiper? I'm hitting the turn signal when I meant to turn on the wipers. Mm-hmm. So it's, it really has to do with some of the biology in our brain. So
how would you describe neuroplasticity? Is there like an actual definition?
Neuroplasticity is really a well-formed connection of neural pathways. So just think of it as a muscle. right? So if you lift weights or you engage in a certain physical activity, those muscles gain strength, they gain bulk, they work well together on a regular basis. And that's the same goes on in our brains with our neurons and the connections there. And so those connections form into, like I said, kind of a superhighway. And that's it's an actual biological change in our brain.
You know, I always think about when I hear the topic of neuroplasticity, or I'm helping people understand it, like learning a language, right? Or learning a musical instrument. And while you're doing it, it's so hard. But when you actually learn it and it becomes ingrained in your brain and your body and your soul, it is just like second nature.
Yes, and that's a great example about learning a language. So if you look at scans of like an infant's brain, there are so many neurons, so many connections there that basically it's exponential, right? So anything that they're exposed to and that is reinforced, the energy is targeted to those neural pathways, right? Then that grows. And the others that are not used tend to be pruned away. But because we have so many when we're young, we can learn things very, very fast. And that's why kids, younger kids, often will pick up multiple languages, a second language, third language, so easily compared to an adult learning another language. If you look back in the history of behavioral sciences, there was a belief at one point in time that when we turned 18, that basically our brain, not on that magic day, but that our brain stopped forming, and it was really stroke research that indicated no, we can continue to form neural pathways. Now we don't have access to as many as we did as an infant; many had been pruned away, but we can definitely build and strengthen. And we see that in people that have had loss of some body functions and things like that, and they've relearned. As a matter of fact, sometimes other pathways will be formed around that's damaged to enable someone to engage in that behavior.
Do you agree that failure is a part of long-term success? That the failure part might be that it's just taking a longer time to adopt the behavior and to build the new neural pathway in your brain?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you succeeded at everything that you did, then you would not be growing, right? I mean, it's that I like to say, maturity is developed because we have faced and overcome an obstacle. If we've never had to overcome an obstacle, we're not going to grow, we're not going to mature. So those are just kind of stair steps along the way. I'm not going to go out and run a marathon tomorrow. It's highly unlikely that I'm going to run a marathon at all. But if I was, I certainly wouldn't start by doing that. It makes a lot of sense that I would maybe start with maybe jogging to the end of my block if it was me,
right?
And working my way there. And that same concept can be applied to any type of behavior change.
That's a really good point, Jody, because when I think about the changes that we all have to consider in our life, it's not just isolated to health and mental well-being, correct? It's like, how do you be financially well? How do you find the most fulfillment in your life in a positive way? And that might mean that it might be the way you talk to yourself mentally, or how you think about a behavior.
Right, and no change or no behavior really exists in isolation, right? Habits or behaviors or even ways of thinking are typically associated with other things. So there's internal changes that are addressed, but then there's also environmental or external changes. And some of those changes are difficult. There's some ripple effects, maybe some unintended consequences that we didn't anticipate. If I was going to maybe stop smoking, how is that going to affect my social relations? What am I going to do with my hands? When
right, yeah.
When I would typically be holding a cigarette, and there's just all sorts of things that we don't think about when we go to make a change.
And that might be worth considering. How is this change going to impact the rest of my life, and who's going to support me through this?
Right. And, you asked me early on about how is aerospace, is there a connection? And I said systems. And as a psychologist, I'm fascinated with systems. How are the different parts of something, anything? How do they work together or not work together to either maintain a behavior or change a behavior? And so let's say, so we know from a systems perspective that one of the things that drives that a system wants is homeostasis. And we as human beings like homeostasis. We like what's familiar. We like what's known to us because our brains often perceive something new as, because it's different, it's potentially threatening. That makes us uncomfortable. We live in a society that it's not really okay to be uncomfortable. We kind of get those messages that we shouldn't have to feel discomfort. And so we're all kind of driven toward this homeostasis, which is that balance. The system is comfortable, this is known, and when you go to change something, you are shifting at least one element of that system, which does have those ripple effects to the other portions. And sometimes the other portions of that system, the other parts of that system, aren't comfortable. And so there's some pushback to go back to the norm or the usual.
It almost sounds like whatever change you make, whether it's small or big, you have to be brave, right? It takes a lot of courage because, like you said, you might face a backlash in a sort when you're trying to, make it stick.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, with every change, so there's a saying that is attributed to a Roman philosopher that with every new beginning is some beginning's end. Right? So not only are you facing something new, something different, that's probably going to be uncomfortable for a period of time, but you're, there's a sense of loss as well. Mm-hmm. So you may be giving up. Maybe let's say you decided that you wanted to change the way that you saved money or something related to your finances, right? So maybe you're going to stop doing one thing and putting money here, and you're going to do something else with that money over here. That may feel risky to put the money over here, and at the same time, maybe you're not able to spend that money on something that you normally would. And there are people around you, maybe that was spending money with people on going out to eat, and your family may be saying, "Hey, we used to go out to eat." And now we're kind of unhappy that we're not going out to eat, and we're redirecting that money. So that's just a simple example.
Yeah.
But there's going to be ripple effects, and you'll gain something and you'll lose something.
You had mentioned systems and in a way, really talking about how social connections impact change and the success and longevity of the change. Can you talk a little bit more about that, like developing new systems in order for the change to be successful? And how do our social connections influence our success with the change?
So we are learning more and more about how the brain works, right? And the messages that are coming into our brain and how that affects how we feel and how we think and how we behave. So let's say I wanted to change the way I eat. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I really like to do. But I want to change that, and I want it to eat healthier. So maybe I am going to go on a particular type of diet, for example, and the people around me in my family are not going to be on that same type of diet. Maybe I'm just going to cut out sweets. So I know that in the environment certainly impacts my ability to make changes because, like as we said earlier, these are progressive, right? I'm not going to typically just be able to change my entire life in a day. So I have to take some steps to do this. So I want to not be exposed to sweets, but my family really loves having cookies or desserts or things in the house or high carb snacks. So it's going to be pretty difficult for me to make that change in the midst of a system that also isn't making that change, right? And we hear this a lot with people that have tried to change their diet or exercise or things like that. The system around them, the people that support them or that they interact with on a regular basis are not making that same change. And so if you're going to make a significant change, then you're much more likely to be successful in that if you have a support system around it. Now, can you do that when your family's not making that same change? Yes, you can. But it'd be really important then for you to find a different type of support system that feeds and supports you in that. You may have some friends that are going to engage in this with you as well, and so you have some accountability and you have some support and feedback. So you can build a system around a change, even if you feel like you're doing it in isolation right now. You have the capacity to be able to build a different type of system around you to support you.
When we think about change, a thing that I often experience when I'm working with people in groups or at a conference is that it's so enticing to be a part of a program that advertises quick results and quick change, like a lot of those fad diets or, get rich quick schemes. What do you think about those?
Well, they would be great if they worked, right? I mean, let's face it. I mean, we live in a society and a culture that is really that really emphasizes supreme convenience and instantaneous gratification. The thought of putting a baked potato in the oven as opposed to putting it in the microwave, most of us would be appalled at the extra time. So there's certainly a drive toward easy access, easy change. I would say that for the most part, in my opinion, the things that are really quick tend not to be lasting. So, even if you're going to change a habit, let's say it takes, 20 to 30 days to really change a habit. So let's go back to that neuroplasticity. Mm-hmm. You didn't build that neural pathway overnight, right? It was repetition, it was practice, it was continued use over time of that behavior or that thought or that belief that's built that neural pathway. And anything that's going to be that do this and it's going to instantaneously change your life is highly suspect because that's not how our brains work. And it's also, I don't think, takes into account all the ripple effects, right? That are going to kind of, surge back. And because nothing exists in isolation. So anything, if you're going to make a lasting change, it's going to be something that you're going to invest in yourself. You're going to deliberately and intentionally take the steps to make this change over time, and you will build a strong foundation for that is much more likely to withstand the test of time.
And how does social media kind of play into this? Social media can be an avenue that actually leads to a lot of stress in our lives. Mm-hmm. And the way that society, like our standard for beauty and our standard for what is considered to be healthy is so unrealistic, in my opinion, that it can lead to a lot of stress and a lot of feeling discouraged when you're not able to reach this really high standard that you may have never been able to reach.
Just like with your body, that, what you eat, you are what you eat, what you take in cognitively, what you see, what you're reading in social media, what you're watching on TV, is feeding your brain. And it's happening whether you're consciously attending to it or not. So you can be driving past billboards or sitting in a office and see magazines, right? So that these messages are coming in and they are incredibly powerful. I've had experiences where my dad came to visit and he was listening to a news channel that I don't typically listen to, and he just would leave it on during meals, and I found myself just kind of increasingly becoming a little despondent until I didn't even think I was listening. And then I started listening to the same messages, and they were always very engaging. Our brains are built in a manner that they are very attentive to potential threats. So anything that's a negative message is going to get our attention much faster, and media knows this. And anything that's new or drastic is going to get our attention faster. And so that's where some of these claims too of this, this you're going to change your life in a day or a week, really get our attention. But the stress, you mentioned the stress, and we get these messages all the time. And you'll remember that I used the terms intentional and deliberate a little bit earlier. And that's really hard, to be intentional, to be deliberate, to be in this moment and make decisions about how you want to meaningfully change something when you're always in reactive mode, right? When you always feel like there's a potential threat, or that there's something wrong, or that you're just feeling very stressed out. Those messages, think of that as your diet. What are you taking in? Who are you hanging out with? What are you looking at on Facebook? Is it feeding you? Is it bringing you calm? Is it helping you be more mindful? Or is it really alarming you and continuing to activate our brains that there's a source of threat out there?
I think that what we take in is not just limited to food and exercise, right? Like, it's what are we engaging in our life, the kind of people that surround us, the shows that we're watching, what we're looking at on our phones and our computer. And
Absolutely.
it's almost beneficial to ask yourself, like, what's nurturing and what's depleting.
Absolutely. That's spot on.
You had mentioned throughout our conversation so far neuroplasticity and change in habits, right? But habits do become a part of our identity. So is it fair to say that our habits become a part of our identity?
I would say yes, depending on how strong that is, right? So, let's say you're a runner. A lot of people who are really serious about running, I think, would absolutely say that that's part of who they are. If I engage in any type of behavior on a regular basis, then it's going to become a part of who I am. I will say I'm a scuba diver. That's very important to me. If I couldn't do that, that would feel like a real loss.
I think about this when people kind of label themselves in certain ways, like for example, they may say, I really enjoy drinking or smoke. I'm a smoker, I engage in these activities, and therefore this is who I am and this is how I'm going to be. And that's not necessarily true, is what I'm hearing you say, because you can change that at any point in your life and adopt a new identity.
Oh, yes. We can change things. Some things are harder than others, but that's one of the great things about the way that human beings are built and who we are, is that we can make choices to change some really drastic things about ourselves, and you hear stories about that. But I was also thinking about what you just said in terms of our identities. And, what also came to mind too were things like some huge things like retirement, right? And, if I work in a particular job, let's say I'm clergy, and that's what I've done, and I'm going to enter into retirement. And I know many clergy still continue to serve, but that's, my day-to-day is so very different. And I have to almost develop partially a new identity. Or let's say that you've been a parent and you now are an empty nester. So a lot of our habits have habits built around them as well, whether it's going to a certain place, meeting certain people, engaging, our day progresses in a certain way. And if we can change those things and adapt and find new meaning and different meaning and new exciting things, and we can change all sorts of other smaller behaviors.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you said about what system are you in currently, and how can you create a new system that supports you in the change that you want. I also think about, like, when you're trying to make a behavior change or reach a goal or create a goal, I could say this for myself, like, I really love learning and I love trying new things. And sometimes I fall into this, I'm going to say trap, that I do too many things at once. And then, and then I kind of like let it go halfway because it's too overwhelming. So it sounds like what you're saying to me, that it's almost better to just pick one thing and kind of go with it all the way.
Yeah, now sometimes you might pick one thing and you get halfway there and you go, yeah, that's not for me, like aerospace
Right.
engineering. But yes, we can overwhelm ourselves by trying to attend to too many things at once. It was interesting. I was in a meeting this morning and we were talking about strategic planning, and we were talking about things that we'd like to do. And wow, if we tried to do all those things, none of them would get very far, right? Because our resources would be spread too thin. Our focus would be too diffuse. So, choosing, 2 or 3 things that you really want to focus on, or if it's really big, maybe just one for a period of time. It doesn't mean that you can't, as you're, developing that skill, that you can't then add something else. But self-efficacy really depends on those successes. So you want to set smaller goals for yourself that really you can succeed, because you're teaching yourself that you can be successful. You don't really want to set yourself up for the opposite, to set so many, or to set the goal so large that you're teaching yourself that you can't do it.
Right. And I think it also goes back to, how are you feeding yourself? Like, what messages are you taking in? And how are you approaching the goal? Because if you're approaching it from a place of anxiety and stress, and that I have to do this because everyone else is doing it, it might not last long, and it might be an unpleasant experience. And to me, it almost feels like the goals and the changes that you want to adopt in your life have to come from a place of meaning and authenticity and true, like, personal desire.
Because it's going to be, let's face it, anytime you try something new or you make a change, it's going to feel uncomfortable. And we don't do it very well. When I first learned to ride a motorcycle.
Wow, Jody, we're learning so much about you today. Motorcycles, scuba diving.
That's true, right? I'm telling you about my life lessons here. But, I was an absolute klutz on this motorcycle. So I deliberately actually bought an old used motorcycle from a friend that I wouldn't mind actually if I fell, or, I dropped it or whatever, which did happen. And I remember going with a friend of mine who he'd been riding for a long time, and we were at a particular corner, and I was going to make a right-hand turn, which is the hardest thing when you're learning on the bike. So I came to a stop, and sure enough, I dropped the bike over, and I remember him pulling over and just looking at me, and he didn't come back to help me, and I was like, okay, oh, he thinks I can do it. He knows I can do it. I can do it. And so I did. I picked that bike back up. But it was uncomfortable and it was embarrassing. And anytime that we try something new, I think you just have to be compassionate to yourself, right?
Yeah.
You're just not going to be an expert right out of the box. And just as we would encourage someone else, or praise someone else, or compliment someone else, and you want to do that for yourself, because that self-compassion is going to help you stay on track.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, like, when we were all babies and we first started walking, and we fell many times until we were able to actually start walking, and we did it with a lot of encouragement and support. And I think that as we get older, there's so many barriers that we face, and it's our ego and the way we talk to ourselves, like self-limiting and self-berating internal voices can inhibit our success. So I think what you say about practicing compassion is probably one of the most important things. So let's say that someone is ready to start taking action towards a change. Do you have any tips or suggestions for them?
If you're thinking that you want to do something different, one of the tips would be that you, again, don't set a goal that's so large that you're not going to experience successes along the way. It's very important to break something down. You can have a goal that's out there, but set smaller steps for yourself so that you can feel those accomplishments. Those will continue to motivate you on the way. I would recommend that if you don't have to build, you might just invite your support system to assist you in that. It may be in regards to getting more information. It could be about helping you plan. It could be about being accountable or even participating with you. One of the things that's really helpful is if someone else is being successful and you can see that you're like them, that's motivating too. Like if they can do it, I can do it. And then and being compassionate. There's going to be some unintended consequences. It could be positive, could be great consequences. It could be things you just that kind of are irritating or feel like a little bit of a loss and you hadn't anticipated those. So be open, be curious about it, and invest in yourself. It's learning something new is growing and developing.
And I think that's so important. I recently heard someone say that, whenever you're learning something new, it's a combination of competency and confidence, building those two things. And,
Nice.
and part of that is, it's like, in order to build your confidence, like you said, you have to try and fail and succeed, try, fail, and succeed. And then the other part of that is competency. It's like, how do you educate yourself? How do you really, like you said, invest in yourself, invest in the change that you are looking to make? And I think with this particular topic, the Church Pension Group, CPG's online learning center, has some really great courses that can help you along your path towards maintaining and succeeding with change. Jody was was the subject matter expert in the resilience course, which is a 6-part course on different aspects of resilience. That can be really great for you to listen to if you're looking to start a change. Also, the visioning course and the SMART goals course. So take a look at the resource section in the podcast if you'd like to be directed to those courses. Well, thank you so much, Jody. This has been so informative.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Theme music for our podcast is by Fran McKendry. Be sure to visit the e-learning library and learning center on cpg.org for wellness resources. And please join us again for Choose Well.
This material is not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. CPG does not provide any healthcare services and therefore cannot guarantee any results or outcomes. Always seek the advice of a healthcare professional with any questions about your personal healthcare, including diet and exercise. You've been listening to Choose Well from the Church Pension Group.